In order to get beer from your keg to your glass, there are two sides that have to work together. The first is your gas or CO2 side, and the second is your liquid or beer side. And there are four major components that you'll need in order to make that happen. So before you continue this video, to set up your Jockey Box, make sure you have the following. The first is your Jockey Box, of course, a keg of whatever you're serving, CO2, and a dispensing kit, which includes two types of tubing, one for your gas line, the other for your beverage line, a coupler that attaches both of them to your keg, and a CO2 regulator that you'll attach to your CO2 tank. Additionally, you'll need three simple tools: a faucet wrench, a crescent wrench, and a flathead screwdriver. A quick heads up before we get started. To keep things simple, we'll walk you through the entire setup process first on a Jockey Box with one tap. Then, toward the end of the video, we'll introduce one supplemental piece of equipment in your dispensing kit that will allow you to easily operate a Jockey Box with multiple taps. Now that we've inventoried everything we'll need, let's get after it. We're going to work in steps, starting with the gas side. But first, step number 0. This is so important that we actually have to mention it before step 1. Don't add any ice until your Jockey Box is completely set up. Common sense is going to tell you that this thing is going to be heavier to move after it's full of ice. And 2, the stainless steel coils will likely have residual moisture from your previous cleaning. So to prevent any chance of freezing, we want to make sure we get beer into and through the coils first. We'll let you know when to do both. Step 1, attach the regulator. You'll attach your regulator to the side of your CO2 tank and then tighten into place with your crescent wrench. One thing to note on your regulator, you want to make sure that there is a rubber or plastic seal between the connection. The dial on the front of our regulator controls the flow of gas from our tank to the keg, allowing us to adjust the right amount of pressure for the beer. The top gauge measures PSI, or amount of CO2 being delivered to our keg. This is the gauge we'll focus on and most important for what we're using the regulator for today. What is it called? The secondary gauge, if your regulator has one, measures the gas pressure inside the tank, not its weight. However, it can be helpful in forecasting when your tank is getting close to empty. The easiest way to tell how much CO2 is left in your tank is simply to weigh it. Empty, our 5-pound aluminum tank should weigh about 7.5 pounds, known as their tear weight, imprinted on the side of the tank. Full, they should weigh approximately 12.5 pounds. A good rule of thumb is to plan for about 1 pound of CO2 for every half-barrel keg you're pouring. This is small. If you've ordered a CO2 tank from us or someone else online, you will need to have it filled at a local retailer, as federal law prohibits us shipping full tanks. Step 2, attach your CO2 lines. You'll take one end of your gas line and attach it to the output on your regulator. You'll take the other end of your gas line and attach it to the input on the side of your coupler. But before doing so, we want to make sure that the valve on our regulator is set to the off position. Here, it's off. Now it's on. Here it's off. Now it's on. We want it off for now. As far as the length for both your gas line and your beverage line, 4 to 6 feet is pretty standard. But as you can tell, we've obviously trimmed ours for the demonstration. Now for step 3, let's attach our beverage lines. We'll start by taking one end of our beer jumper and connecting it to the output on the top of our coupler. With the other end, this is going to connect to the input on our Jockey Box. Depending on the model of your Jockey Box at home, your inputs may be on the front, or like this guy, located on the back. For this connection, we like using our custom 90-degree tail pieces. They're super convenient when attached because they keep all of your tubing angled down and out of your way. By the way, if you like this design, any of our dispensing kits come with our beverage jumpers with these 90-degree tail pieces already assembled. Lastly, It's a small yet really important detail. We want to make sure that we insert a small rubber washer at each connection point to ensure that we've got a leak-free seal. Like that big turn. You guys like that? Before we engage our coupler, let's first attach our faucet. So before we do so, I want to point out one little detail, and that is inside the faucet, as well as inside the assembly here, you'll be able to see and feel a series of tiny teeth. When we're attaching this, we want to make sure that both rows of those teeth sync up together. And then with this spinning faucet collar, once those teeth are aligned and synced, and you'll feel it, you can also hear it. Once you've got that aligned in the position that you want, you'll spin this faucet collar, and it's going to feel counterintuitive, but it's counterclockwise. This is where the faucet wrench is going to come into play. You'll take its single tooth and align it to one of the holes on the spinning faucet collar, and then using the collar as leverage, you'll tighten that collar into place. The faucet may want to spin on you, so you're just using a little resistance to hold it straight up and down. There you go. Now in step 5, we're going to turn our gas on and adjust its pressure. One thing to note, however, is that the pressure on draft beer in a tap room is lower, typically between 12 and 15 psi. When we're talking about a Jockey Box, we need the pressure higher to account for the resistance the beer is going to meet while it's traveling through the narrow stainless steel coils. So to turn your gas on, we're going to start by opening the tank all the way, turning the valve on, and then adjusting our pressure. Remember, we have to pull out the knob if it's in its locked position. And we're going to adjust to 25 psi. Voila. Some regulators may not have an adjustment dial like ours. If that's the case, there will be a small adjustment screw in its place. Simply use a screwdriver to adjust it. In step 6, we're going to attach our coupler to our keg. But before doing so, we want to make sure that the faucet we just attached is closed. Otherwise, beer everywhere. So if you notice, the faucet is currently open, and all we want to do is close that. To attach the coupler, we'll start with its handle in the angled up, unlocked position. You'll notice threads on the bottom of your coupler that will sink into place with threads on the top of the keg. We're using a Sankey D-style keg coupler, which is going to be compatible with most US domestic kegs, not just our adorable 2-gallon guy here. Once you've twisted the coupler and locked it into place, to engage it, you'll pull out on the handle, push down, and then release it. Now, it's a perfect time for a quick lesson in keg anatomy. As you can tell from the masterpiece behind me, CO2 enters the keg via the input on the side of the coupler, where it then pushes down on our beer, forcing it up and through an internal spear, where it exits the output of the coupler, meets our beverage jumper, where it finally lands in our Jockey Box. And a quick lesson in gas anatomy tells us that a regulator can only add CO2 pressure. It can't remove it. However, if you notice that you've set your regulator too high after you've already started serving, we'll need to release some of that extra pressure in the keg. Here's how. We'll first start by turning down our regulator a couple turns. Note, you're not going to see the gauge on the regulator move until we release that pressure from inside the keg. We'll do that by pulling the pin on the release valve on the side of the coupler until you hear that hiss fade. Then we can go back to readjusting our pressure up to the suggested 25 psi to continue serving. Keep in mind that Jockey Boxes are best utilized for those non-permanent scenarios. So, unlike kegerators or your bar at home, we don't want to leave it connected at 25 psi overnight or for prolonged periods of time. Doing so is going to overcarbonate your beer. If you intend to keep enjoying the same kegs for a couple days in a row uninterrupted, that's totally fine and easy to do. When you're done serving at the end of the day, but know you're going to resume pouring those same kegs tomorrow, we need to follow the same two-step process we just demonstrated to release some of that pressure in the keg. With one caveat, we need to readjust our pressure back down to 12 psi. Now, you're good to leave everything hooked up overnight. Step 7 calls for us to completely fill the stainless steel coils all the way through to the faucet with a preliminary run of beer. Remember, this step has to happen before adding ice. As we mentioned earlier, there's going to be some residual moisture in our jumper and our coils from its previous cleaning, so this first pass of beer helps prevent any potential freezing. In step 8, sorry, laughing. I think this is all a joke anyway. In step 8, before we rush to start serving our guests, now that our entire system is set up, we want to check all of our connections to make sure that we don't have any gas leaks or beverage leaks. Starting at the gas side, we want to check the connections at our regulator and at our coupler. Moving to our beer side, we'll check our connections at our coupler and then on the input, while not forgetting the two connections on the inside of our jockey box, where the input meets the coils, and then where the coils meet the faucet. This is another really good reason to mention why we don't prematurely fill our jockey box with ice. Otherwise, digging through that ice is going to make it extremely difficult to check these two connections. Step 9, add ice. Finally. Okay. Fill your jockey box completely full of ice. Capacity is going to vary depending on the jockey box model and cooler size. This adorable, rugged, and super convenient one tap will use about 20 pounds. Last but not least, our final step, number 10. We've got to let everything acclimate. Let's give our jockey box about 10 to 15 minutes for all of its stainless steel components, everything that your beer is going to come into contact with, to reach the same temperature. Once you do, you'll get a perfect pour. A good indication that it's ready is when your faucet is cold to the touch, or depending on the ambient temperature, condensation starts to form. When that happens, you're ready to pour yourself one. But before we let you go, we've shown you what a setup looks like on a system with one tap. If you happen to be using a jockey box with multiple taps, you're going to need an additional beverage line, coupler, and gas line for each tap on your jockey box. In order to conveniently still use our single CO2 tank and regulator, we've got to attach the gas line for every keg we intend to tap to a CO2 manifold. A manifold simply acts as a splitter, allowing us to send gas to multiple kegs at once. Some manifolds will also have a valve that allows us the option to turn the gas on and off to each coupler and keg independently. Congratulations, you just set up your jockey box and learned how to incorporate a manifold. We know we threw a lot at you, especially if this is your first rodeo, but trust me, setting up a jockey box is going to become second nature before you know it. The investment you've made in becoming fluent with your jockey box will earn you the respect and appreciation that good beer, poured well, deserves. Subscribe to our channel for instructional videos, best practices, and the occasional outtakes. And follow us on social across the board at Cold Break USA. Have questions? Email us, support@coldbreakusa.com, or comment below. Until next time, cheers. Drawing blank. Nope, laughing, sorry, for no reason. I'm just very excited that there's ice in here now.